They say a commissar's duty is to instill fear and discipline in the ranks. But what do you do when your soldiers already know no fear? When every last trooper under your command is eager to charge into hell with a smile hidden behind a skull-masked respirator? Welcome to my life, the life of a Krieg Commissar. I stand amidst an army of the dead. Not literally, not yet. But to the Death Korps of Krieg, they have been dead from the day they were born. They fight as if they have nothing to lose, because on Krieg, you surrender everything to the Emperor the moment you draw breath. My assignment is to the 317th Krieg Siege Regiment, Astra Militarum. I've been with these trench-crawling, shovel-carrying specters for 5 years. 5 years of mud, blood, and chemical fog. 5 years of watching men who barely have a life to call their own throw it away in glorious sacrifice at the drop of a hat. And 5 years of trying, against all convention and intuition, to hold them back. Yes, hold them back. It's an inversion few outside the commissariat would believe. A commissar whose primary duty isn't to push cowardly men forward, but to restrain brave men from senseless death. I don't shout forward for the Emperor, as much as I find myself barking, "Steady, you fools, not yet." If I ever wrote a treatise on my experiences, that might well be the title. Not Yet, a Commissar's Guide to the Death Korps. A dark joke, perhaps, but humor is one of the few shields I have left to keep me sane out here on the edge of oblivion. Picture a shattered battlefield under a toxic, ashen sky. The air is unbreathable. A witch's brew of radioactive dust and nerve agents clings to every stagnant gust of wind. The sun, if it still exists above the perpetual clouds, offers no comfort, only a sickly glow. This is where the Krieg excel. We stand in a trench carved from blackened mud that was once fertile ground. Barbed wire and blasted rock-crete bunkers checker the landscape. The smell. Throne. The smell would make a hive sewer seem like a pleasure garden. Rotting corpses, cordite, promethium, the ever-present chemical stink that burns your lungs, even through a rebreather. I have long since stopped gagging on it. I'd be ashamed to retch in front of these soldiers who endure it without a word of complaint. After all, they were bred in it. I see them on the firing step, peering through periscope-slit trenches or over the parapet. Identical gas masks with haunting, glassy eye lenses fixed forward. Long greatcoats, once blue-gray, now stained black with soot and grime, hanging off thin frames. Bayonets glint faintly on the muzzles of their rifles, always fixed, ready for the next charge. Each soldier is utterly still, a statue awaiting animation. No nervous fidgeting, no chatter to break the silence. In other regiments, I'd have to silence gossip or banter, remind the men to stay alert. Here, there's nothing but discipline and the distant thunder of our heavy guns pounding the enemy lines. The Death Korps need no reminders. The artillery concussions roll over us, and occasionally the ground shakes with the reciprocating impact of enemy shells. Dirt patters down into the trench. A clod lands on my overcoat shoulder. I brush it off absent-mindedly. The man next to me, perhaps I should say the boy, for Emperor knows how young some of these soldiers truly are, doesn't even flinch as a shell screams overhead. He just calmly racks the slide of his last gun to clear the dust out of it, as casually as one might swat a fly. I glance at him. Through the circular glass of his mask's eyepiece, I catch a glimpse of pale skin, coldly lit by the gray dawn. I wonder if he's even old enough to shave under there. Possibly not. It's rumored many of these Kriegers haven't seen more than 16 summers, if that. They won't remove the mask to confirm, and it's not my place to ask. He notices me looking. "Commissar," he inquires, voice muffled and monotone through the filter. Always formal, always the honorific. not a quiver of fear or any emotion that I can detect. Emperor's truth, I sometimes think the rebreather modulates out whatever feeling they might have had. I shake my head. Carry on, I say, feeling slightly foolish, as if he needed my permission to continue being the perfect soldier. When I first arrived to this regiment, I expected the usual challenges of a fresh-faced commissar in the Imperial Guard. Identify the malcontents and cowards, make a brutal example early on, stamp out any simmering resentment toward the officers or the war. This is the sacred duty of the Officio Prefectus, to ensure no guard unit falters in the Emperor's service due to a failure of will or faith. On a dozen battlefronts before, I had done just that. I've executed deserters and traitors, delivered rousing speeches in the face of unbeatable odds, inspired terrified men to hold the line or charge into the jaws of hell. I had become adept at the art of taking a regiment of ordinary humans and hardening them with fear and faith. Then came Krieg, or more specifically, then I was seconded to the Death Korps of Krieg, and all my prior experience became as obsolete as a lasgun with a dead power pack. These soldiers did not need my fear. They already lived in fear. Fear of failing the Emperor. They did not need my encouragement to fight. They would march into no man's land without a word if ordered, or even without orders if you're not careful. What they needed, though none of them would ever say it, was a leash. Someone to remind them that victory for the Emperor is not achieved by dying gloriously for its own sake, but by making sure that when they die, it truly accomplishes something. In my first engagement with the 317th, I witnessed something that haunts me still. We were laying siege to an enemy fortress on Valgard's world, a fetid industrial moon that had fallen to heretics. The Krieg commander, a Colonel Wolf, was determined to take an outer redoubt by nightfall. Our initial bombardments had failed to breach the walls. Any sane commander would have reconsidered, perhaps called for additional artillery or waited for armored support. Instead, he ordered a full infantry charge through a blasted gap in the razor wire, across a field cratered with mines and dotted with heavy bolter nests. It was midday when he gave the order. The assault was to commence immediately. Bright sun, or what passed for sun through the haze, be damned. Enemy guns fully awake and ready. I stood on the fire step and heard him blow his whistle. What followed was equal parts awe-inspiring and horrifying. Hundreds of Death Korps guardsmen climbed from our trench without hesitation, as one like automata triggered by a single switch. Not a single man hung back. They advanced at a steady run, boots crunching skulls and bones underfoot as they went over the top into hell. I saw the first rank get scythed down by interlocking heavy stubber fire from the fortress emplacements. The next rank simply stepped over the bodies and kept advancing, firing las guns methodically as they closed the distance. Las bolts and bullets filled the air. Soldiers fell. Smoke and dust churned up. The cacophony was deafening even from where I stood. The heretics' munitions tore awful gaps in our waves, but nothing stopped the corps. It was madness. It was suicidal. It was working, up to a point. The lead elements made it to the base of the fortress wall, far further than I suspect the enemy expected any attackers to reach. But at such cost, too high a cost. I could see piles of Krieg dead littering the approach. The living were using the corpses of their fallen comrades as sandbags, hunkering behind the growing mounds of bodies to return fire. My stomach lurched at the sight. In all my years, I had never seen a tactic so ghastly, yet so matter-of-fact. To the men of Krieg, it seemed perfectly natural. The fallen were simply making themselves useful one last time, as cover for the living. The colonel was readying the second wave to reinforce. By my estimation, the enemy's guns were still far too intact. A second charge would simply add to the butcher's bill without taking that redoubt. The rational move was to call off the attack, or at least pause to bring up heavy siege guns to punch a hole first. But rationality is not a common virtue in the Death Korps' leadership when blood is already in the water. For them, hesitation is a sin, and an assault once begun must continue until either the objective is taken or no one is left to take it. I realized with a cold clarity that it fell to me to be the voice of reason, or failing that, the voice of the Emperor's larger purpose. So I did something no commissar ever expects to do. I countermanded a direct attack order of an Imperial Guard colonel. I stepped in front of Colonel Wolf as he was about to blow the whistle again. I put my bolt pistol to his temple. "Belay that order," I growled. "We will not squander the Emperor's soldiers on a fortification that our guns can reduce by tomorrow." He looked at me from behind his skull mask. I remember seeing my own reflection in those dark lenses. Perhaps he considered shooting me then and there. I later learned some Krieg would sooner execute a superior than obey a retreat, viewing any delay as cowardice. But the letter of the commissariat's authority stayed his hand. Technically, I had the right, the duty to prevent outright folly. I told him plainly, "This is my judgment. Pull the men back now, Colonel, or I'll execute you for dereliction." It was a gamble and a blasphemous reversal of the usual order of things. Time seemed frozen for an instant. The other staff officers around us stood in stunned silence. I'm sure a few thought I had lost my mind. Perhaps I had. But the colonel slowly lowered his field glass. He gave a curt nod and grudgingly voxed an order to withdraw. Do you know what a withdrawal looks like for the Death Korps? It's not panic or rout, oh no. They begrudgingly, almost methodically, fell back from that killing field with the same discipline they'd advanced, covering fire, leapfrogging in bounds, dragging their wounded and even collecting their dead when possible. They treat their dead like comrades still, perhaps because to a Krieger, death is no barrier to duty. I oversaw the retreat, feeling hundreds of unseen eyes in those masks, probably wishing to burn a hole through me. It was the first time those soldiers had ever heard the order to fall back. I could sense their confusion, perhaps even disappointment. One trooper, limping with shrapnel in his leg, paused and faced me as the others trudged past. He didn't say a word. He just saluted me, a clenched fist to his chest, then turned and went on. Was it respect for saving who I could, or a gesture of silent reproach that I'd denied him a martyr's death that day? I'll never know. In the end, I saved perhaps half the men from annihilation in that assault. We took that fortress 2 days later after a proper bombardment shattered its walls, and we did it with minimal additional casualties, relatively speaking. By Krieg standards, that counted as patience. To me, it was just common sense. But that episode cemented my place and purpose in the regiment. I was not just their moral overseer, but their guide rail, keeping this hurtling train of doom from derailing before the destination is reached. Since that day, I've intervened more times than I can count to rein in their excesses, as the Munitorum charitably calls it. In truth, it often feels like I'm holding back a dam about to burst, and I'm plugging the cracks with my own fingers. Another time, on a different world, they all blur together. Ash wastes, trench lines, ruined hives, pick your nightmare. Our siege marshal planned to flood a hive city's lower levels with lethal gas to flush out a deeply entrenched Jenny Stealer cult, heedless of the fact that there were still tens of thousands of Imperial citizens cowering in those hab blocks. To him, they were already collateral damage the moment the cult took hold, a regret but an acceptable sacrifice if it delivered victory. It fell to me and the attached Ministorum confessor to argue, to beg practically for a different approach. In that case, an appeal to the colonel's sense of duty to the Emperor's loyal subjects, and a subtle reminder that wiping out the very people you're trying to save might technically border on heresy, carried the day. He relented begrudgingly. We instead sealed off those districts and sent in Krieg engineers with flamers and entrenchment charges to clear the cultists block by block. It cost more guardsmen's lives than the gas would have, but it spared innocent Imperial citizens. Ironically, the Death Korps officers never chastised me for that decision. They accepted it with the same stoicism they accept all orders. To them, one method of expunging the enemy was as good as another, so long as it eventually worked, even if it was more costly in their terms. Human life simply doesn't factor into their equations the way it does for others. Let me clarify something. It's not that the Krieg officers or troops are bloodthirsty madmen. It's that they genuinely do not grasp the value of their own lives beyond tools of war. They were raised to see themselves as weapons, not people. Their homeworld's history all but ensured that mindset. I had to study it to understand them. Krieg, the very name of the planet, means war in an ancient Terran tongue, and never was a world more aptly named. Over 15 centuries ago, Krieg was a thriving hive world, productive and proud, until it fell into the abyss of heresy. The details are shrouded by time and propagandist gloss, but we know that Krieg's rulers betrayed the Emperor, declaring independence and renouncing imperial rule. Civil war erupted, loyalists versus traitors, and the planet was doomed to tear itself apart. When all seemed lost, the loyalists took a final drastic measure: total atomic purgation. Colonel Yurtin of the 83rd Krieg Regiment launched a barrage of forbidden weapons that engulfed Krieg in nuclear fire and choking fallout. In a day, the planet was reduced to a radioactive wasteland. Billions died in the initial strikes. Countless more perished in the nuclear winter that followed. Yet, the war did not end. In the ruins and ash, the surviving loyalists and traitors dug in and fought on, generation after generation. For 500 years, Krieg remained a charnel house of trench warfare, a grinding war of attrition with no mercy asked or given. Eventually, the descendants of the Loyalists, gaunt, radiation-scarred, and hardened to the core, wiped out the last heretic. Krieg was won back for the Imperium, at the cost of turning an entire world into a tomb. From that nightmare crucible emerged the culture of the Death Korps. The survivors and their progeny had known nothing but war, and they embraced an absolute creed of sacrifice and penance. To atone for the betrayal that destroyed their world, they vowed to give the Emperor nothing less than everything. The Departamento Munitorum was astonished when Krieg, barely habitable and brimming with lingering radiation, began tithing not one regiment, but dozens. The Krieg commanders offered regiment after regiment of soldiers, fully trained and equipped, all requesting the most hazardous war zones available. For Krieg had no other coin to pay but its own flesh, and it would pay in abundance. The Administratum eagerly accepted. Ever since, Krieg's sole export has been war. Its people are born and bred to fight, and they ask for the worst assignments: stalemates that would bleed others dry, sieges that could last decades, battlefronts choked with poison gas and plagued by contagion. These they endure gladly, as if afraid peace might make them soft or, worse, leave them idle with their ancestral guilt. How do they replenish such dreadful losses, you might wonder, from a world that is a toxic husk? There are dark whispers of secret birthing facilities deep underground, of vitae wombs and accelerated growth programs, cloning vat-grown soldiers. The official records are silent, but the rumors persist. All I know is that the flow of fresh troops from Krieg never falters. No matter how many die, more arrive to take their place, seemingly unperturbed and indistinguishable from those who fell. I've peered at new reinforcements and sometimes thought I recognized faces, as if the same souls come back again and again until duty is done. Maybe that's just fatigue playing tricks on my mind. Or maybe there's some truth to the cloning tales. Either way, they fight as men, they die as men, and I treat them as men, even if they consider themselves nothing more than expendable instruments of the Emperor's will. This deep history and conditioning explains much about my charges. It explains why they will sprint through open ground into oncoming fire without a second's hesitation. Why cowardice simply doesn't exist in their vocabulary, at least not for themselves. In truth, I've never once had to execute a Krieg guardsman for cowardice or desertion. Not once. The thought of deserting their duty is more alien to them than the Tyranids or Necrons we've faced. If anything, I worry far more about overzealous martyrdom than about anyone fleeing. The few times I've drawn my bolt pistol on one of my own men were because he was trying to do something like climb out of the trench without orders, desperate to charge the enemy ahead of schedule, or attempting to throw himself on a live grenade that I was still in the midst of kicking away. How do you threaten men who welcome death? The answer: you don't. You reason with them insofar as reason holds sway. You invoke the Emperor's grander strategy. You remind them that surviving a little longer can mean completing the mission. I've taken to lecturing soldiers that if you die now in vain, you deny the Emperor a victory later. That usually gets through because the only thing they fear, if they fear anything, is failure in their duty. I recall a time I actually raised my voice to a group of Krieg grenadiers who were preparing demolition charges on a bridge. Intelligence had come in that friendly infantry, Cadians in fact, from a neighboring front, were in full retreat and might be falling back across that very bridge. The Krieg sappers were going to blow it anyway to halt an enemy advance. Friendlies be damned. I had to step in. I bellowed, "Hold your fire. Those are our brothers out there." They looked at me like I was speaking Xenos. One of them responded flatly, "Our objective is to deny the bridge, sir." In their minds, orders were orders, no matter who might get caught in the crossfire. I had to physically put myself in front of the detonator and order them to wait until the last possible moment. We let the ragged stream of Cadian survivors scramble across and then blew the bridge with the enemy armor right on their heels. The grenadiers did not protest verbally. Kriegers rarely protest anything, but I could tell from their body language that they thought my actions borderline traitorous for deviating from the original plan. And had the delay allowed the enemy to capture the bridge, I suspect those same grenadiers would have expected me to pay with my life for that failure. They would have been right too. Such is the knife's edge I walk, weighing human lives against mission success in a calculus that Death Korps officers solve only ever in one way. That incident stuck with me because afterwards one of the Cadian sergeants, dirty and half-deafened, clasped my hand and thanked me. "Never thought I'd see a commissar hold back the hammer," he said, voice trembling with exhaustion. "Emperor knows we owe you one." I didn't know how to respond. In the commissariat, we're used to being feared or at best grudgingly respected. But thanked? By guardsmen? Almost unheard of. We are the ones who shoot their comrades for hesitating. Yet, there I was, being lauded as a savior by one group of soldiers and quietly resented by another for the exact same act. I've never felt more the outsider than I did in that moment, standing between those who were relieved by my mercy and those who considered it misplaced. It's a lonely role, being a commissar with the Death Korps. I am literally the only person in the regiment who isn't from Krieg, the only one who can take off his mask and show a human face. In fact, in joint operations with other regiments, I often find myself functioning as the only approachable figure among the Krieg ranks. At inter-regimental briefings, Allied officers will gravitate to me, not to the silent Krieg colonels, when they have questions or concerns. I'm the unofficial interpreter, not for language but for intent. I've had to explain to a bewildered commander from a more conventional unit that yes, if the Krieg major said he'll hold the line, he means to the last man. Or to advise an adjutant that no, the Death Korps probably won't participate in the celebratory parade after the victory. They'll likely already be digging new trenches or asking for redeployment to the next war. These interactions reinforce my odd position. I straddle the world of the living and the world of those who behave as if they're already dead. One thing that often startles outsiders is the sheer faith and fatalism the Death Korps carry. They have a common saying, one they don't shout or wave around, but I've heard it whispered in their vox chatter and prayer circles. Only in death can the Emperor forgive us. To them, death in service isn't just expected, it's redemption. Every life given in the Emperor's name is a step toward absolution for Krieg's ancient sin. I've even seen their field chaplains, often the quartermasters doubling as one, lead them in a litany before a particularly dire assault. To be a man in such times is to be already dead. We go happily to our fate, that the Emperor's judgment upon Krieg may be lifted. It sends a chill through more normal soldiers, but the Kriegers bow their heads in solemn agreement. They truly believe that through death, they are purified. I'd be lying if I said that level of devotion didn't affect me. After enough time among them, you start to internalize bits of their creed. I've caught myself making the sign of the Aquila and murmuring, "Only in death does duty end," under my breath, before climbing out of a trench, as if I too accepted that I'm already dead for the Emperor. That is a common imperial aphorism, sure, but it means something heavier here. I still value my life. Emperor knows I do. But I've become far more numb to the prospect of losing it. Seeing hundreds go willingly to their ends day after day will do that. The first time I saw Quartermaster in action was a revelation in just how far that dedication goes. In Krieg regiments, the quartermasters are a peculiar breed, part medic, part executioner, part priest. After a battle, in most units, you'd have medici and stretcher bearers frantically working to save who they can. On Krieg's battlefields, triage is swift and merciless. I remember stepping into a shattered basilica that had been converted to a forward aid station. The pews were lined with wounded guardsmen, or what was left of them. Groans of pain echoed off cracked Gothic arches. I steeled myself, expecting the usual chaos of chirurgions and orderlies. Instead, I found robed figures moving with eerie calm from soldier to soldier. I watched one quartermaster kneel beside a young Krieger whose lower torso was a mess of blood and burned flesh, a wound that was surely fatal. The quartermaster gently removed the man's identification tags and slipped a medallion depicting the Emperor into the dying soldier's hand. He spoke softly. I couldn't hear over the din, but I imagined words of absolution. Then, as serenely as a father putting a child to bed, the quartermaster drew a heavy las pistol and shot the soldier once, square in the head. The body jolted, then lay utterly still. Emperor's peace, they call it. The quartermaster made the sign of the Aquila, then signaled two mute servitors to carry the corpse away to the side chamber where others were being collected. One of the servitors began stripping the body of usable gear, even as it was being lifted. That was it. That was their version of compassion. I didn't cry out or interfere. What would have been the point? The man was beyond saving, and a quick death was kinder than bleeding out over hours. But the cold, businesslike manner of it, the total absence of ritual mourning beyond a 2-second prayer, chilled me. Another soldier on a nearby pew, half conscious and missing an arm, saw the execution out of the corner of his eye. Did he flinch? No. He simply held out his own rifle toward the quartermaster, offering up his weapon in case he too would not be needing it. Throne, that sight will stay with me forever. In the Death Korps, they don't just expect to die, they plan for it, even in their final moments. After many battles, I've become desensitized enough that I've performed the Emperor's peace myself once or twice when no quartermaster was available. I uttered the same rote words, placed my bolt pistol against a loyal soldier's temple, and ended his suffering. It felt heavy, but also strangely routine. I sometimes worry that my soul is weathering away, sloughing off bits of empathy to better fit in among these people. Or perhaps I'm just learning the grim pragmatism that war in the 41st millennium demands of all of us. Amidst all this darkness, what keeps me going? There are nights, or what passes for night under eternally polluted skies, when I lie in my dugout and stare at the metal ceiling, unable to sleep, wondering if I am making any difference at all. The weight of it can be crushing. The losses, the relentless pace of war, the sense that no matter what I do, the Krieg will die in droves and call it a good day. I think about whether I should have petitioned for a different assignment long ago, or whether I could ever truly reinstate a sense of self-preservation into these soldiers without undermining their effectiveness. But in the end, I always come to the same conclusion. I carry on because, in a twisted way, I have come to believe in what the Death Korps stands for. Not the wanton self-destruction, no. Emperor knows I still balk at their unnecessary sacrifices, but their absolute loyalty, their total commitment to the cause, it's awe-inspiring in its own grim fashion. In a galaxy teetering on the brink, full of weak wills and half-measures, here is a force that will not falter. They will give all. There is a purity in that, a frightening one, but pure nonetheless. I've learned to take a cold comfort in the predictability of their dedication. I don't have to cajole them to fight. I don't have to worry they'll break and run when things turn dire. They won't. If anything, I have to worry they'll charge too far ahead. It's a strange inversion of the usual problem, and in that sense they make my job simple even as they make it agonizing. I've also found camaraderie of a sort, unexpected as that may sound. Not in the usual laughter and cards and bawdy tales around a campfire. Those things don't exist in a Krieg regiment. But in shared hardship, a bond has slowly formed. I remember trudging back to our lines after one particularly horrific offensive. I was limping from a lash burn on my thigh. The pain was excruciating with each step, but I refused to be carried. Out of nowhere, a young Krieger, might have been the same lad I exchanged a glance with this morning, I'm not sure, came up beside me and wordlessly offered me his shoulder to lean on. I was too drained to refuse. We marched like that through the sucking mud and acrid rain for a good kilometer. I finally muttered, "Thank you, guardsman," as awkward as that sounded coming from me. He replied simply, "It is my duty, sir." He didn't even look at me, just kept his eyes forward as we hobbled along. That was the closest to concern or kindness I'd ever seen from one of them. Maybe he did it purely because a commissar is a valuable asset to keep alive. Maybe because helping a wounded comrade, even one outside their kin, is reflexive to these soldiers. Or maybe, just maybe, because he'd accepted me as one of his own in that moment. We even share grim humor sometimes. Yes, even a Krieger can make a joke, I discovered. It was after another drawn-out siege victory. We were all half dead from exhaustion, cleaning our weapons and tending gear in the bunker, waiting for the next deployment orders. I had removed my gas mask, letting my face breathe for a minute. A veteran grenadier, one of the few who had been around longer than I, glanced at me. In his flat, gravelly voice, he said, "Sir, permission to speak freely." I raised an eyebrow and nodded. Without a hint of a smile, he remarked, "Respectfully, you might consider keeping your rebreather on, sir. It would improve morale for the other regiments. They find our lack of faces disturbing." For a heartbeat, I was stunned. Then a chuckle escaped me, followed by genuine laughter. "Emperor, help me!" I laughed until my sides hurt. The grenadier gave a small nod and went back to cleaning his bayonet, as if he hadn't just told the driest joke in the galaxy. I like to think he was pleased he elicited a laugh from the stodgy commissar. It's hard to tell with the mask, but I'd wager there was a ghost of a grin under it. Moments like that, rare as a blue sun, shine all the brighter in the gloom of unending war. The war goes on and on and on. We've fought heretics spewed from the eye of terror, greenskin hordes on distant Agri moons, tyrannid infestations that consumed entire continents, and soulless Necron legions rising from tomb cities. Different enemies, different battlefields, but the Death Korps approach each with the same stoic, unrelenting resolve. If the foe is entrenched, we dig them out inch by inch. If the foe charges, we stand fast and trade them life for life until they have none left. There's a saying among Imperial commanders: other regiments win by inches, the Kriegers win by yards of graves. Morbid but apartment, I recall a grueling campaign against a massive orc. We were ordered to hold a valley choke point at all costs, and we did. Emperor knows we did. After weeks of non-stop battle, the valley was a charnel pit of orc corpses so high you could climb them. Our trenches collapsed in places from the mounds of bodies. We lost thousands of guardsmen, but we held that line. When it was over, the surviving Kriegers didn't cheer or collapse in relief. They simply waited in the blood-soaked mud for the next order, as if nothing significant had happened, unflinching, unfazed. It was then I truly understood these soldiers would stand and die to the last without an ounce of doubt. And as terrible as that cost is, it is also why, time and again, the Imperium has victory snatched from the jaws of certain defeat. I often think about what will become of me after all this. Commissars generally either die young in a ditch somewhere or live to become living legends with impressive mustaches and tattered greatcoats telling tales to fresh cadets. If I managed to cheat death long enough to be old and gray, I doubt I'd make for a good raconteur. Who would want to hear these stories? They're too grim by half, and I suspect I won't be pinned with many medals either. The Death Korps don't really do medals for individual heroics, and I've adopted that habit. I haven't recommended any soldier for honors, not because none were brave, but because all were. And singling one out almost feels wrong. Bravery is as common as breathing here, so what reward do you give a man for doing exactly what every one of his brothers did? Instead, we make note of deeds in the regimental annals, we tally the fallen, and we carry on. Maybe one day I'll get reassigned to a more typical regiment. A part of me wonders if I'd even know how to handle normal soldiers anymore. I'd probably scare a unit of Cadians half to death with my expectations. I can imagine barking at some poor trooper to charge a bunker and being genuinely surprised if he hesitates. Because I'm so used to Krieg, where they would already be halfway there. Throne, I'd have to adjust. In a way, serving with the Death Korps has spoiled me as a commissar. It has made me harder, colder, and perhaps less forgiving than I used to be because I've grown accustomed to absolute discipline and sacrifice. If I told a Cadian unit to fight to the last man, I suspect I might actually mean it literally, because I've seen it done. That's a dangerous thing, isn't it? To have one's baseline for what soldiers can endure shifted so far. If I ever do leave Krieg service, I'll have to remind myself that most humans have limits. The dawn is breaking now. A sickly yellow-orange smear on the horizon, filtered through toxins and smoke. Another day on this Emperor-forsaken front. We've been bombarding the enemy's lines all night. The guns finally fell silent an hour ago. In the eerie quiet, you can hear the drip of condensation in the trenches, the shuffling of boots as the men get into attack positions. Our objective today is an enemy strong point across no man's land, the last hurdle before we can sweep into the ruins of a manufactorum beyond. Intelligence says they're dug in deep bunkers, razor wire, probably a minefield or two for good measure. A horrible place to assault. In short, just another Tuesday morning for the Death Korps. I make my way down the line, stepping over the bodies of those who didn't make it through the night's shelling. A few unlucky souls who caught a stray counter-barrage round. A quartermaster is already there, murmuring prayers over them and collecting their tags. The living shift aside respectfully as I pass. I see the watchmaster, their equivalent of a sergeant, a first platoon, a burly figure somehow distinguished even under all the grime by the battered leather strap of his helmet and a slightly heavier carapace on his shoulders. He cradles the company's banner, a torn, mud-streaked flag bearing the imperial aquila and the number of the regiment. Technically, it's my duty to safeguard that banner, but in practice, a junior officer or chosen veteran carries it. I catch his eye, or at least I imagine I do, through his mask, and give a firm nod. He nods back. No words. None needed. It's almost time. I feel the familiar flutter in my gut that precedes going over the top, that tiny spark of human fear that even I still feel. Good. It means I'm alive, and that I still value being alive. I take a deep breath of filtered air and draw my chainsword. The motor hums quietly, a reassuring purr. With my other hand, I check my bolt pistol, ensure a round is chambered. Around me, dozens upon dozens of Krieg infantry ready their own weapons. Some kiss Aquila pendants or quickly scrawl the sign of the cross on their chest plates. Little human gestures peeking out from behind the stoic facade. I clear my throat and raise my voice so the line can hear me. "Soldiers of Krieg," I call out. 100 expressionless masks turn slightly in my direction. "Our Emperor watches us today." It's a cliché, but true enough in our belief. Show him your courage, steady, wait for the signal, and give them hell. Perhaps not the most eloquent speech, but rousing speeches aren't really needed here. The main point is the steady. Don't rush. Wait for it. The signal comes. 3 sharp whistle blasts from the company commander to my right. Immediately, with practiced ease, grapnels are thrown to haul aside our concertina wire, and scaling ladders are shoved up against the trench lip. "Advance!" I shout, though the men already know what to do. Up and over we go. A line of gray-coated figures clambers out of the earth like resurrected corpses from a grave, and I'm with them, a black-clad shadow among the ghosts. The final act of this grim routine plays out. As I run, I find myself sprinting alongside that very same young soldier I was observing earlier. Fate or chance, here we are, paces apart, charging through shell holes and over broken ground toward the enemy's guns. Lasfire lances out to meet us, sizzling past my ear. I hear the mechanical whiz of a heavy stubber and the whump of rounds hitting the dirt. Someone cries out and goes down hard behind me. I don't look back. The two of us, the lad and I, reach a shattered section of razor wire. An artillery shell from last night left a convenient gap. He pauses just a half-second to hold the wire up for me with the muzzle of his rifle, letting me duck under without tearing my coat. Even now, in the storm of death, he has the presence of mind to assist his commissar. I clap a hand on his shoulder in thanks as we push on. A part of me wants to yell, "Get back in cover," because he's practically bounding ahead, but I swallow it. The objective is close now. Ahead looms the enemy trench, a dark line bristling with fire. Our artillery bombardment has left it a mess of craters and broken firing steps. I see fearful faces of traitor militia. Yes, traitors again, as it often is, amidst the smoke. They're pouring las and autogun fire at us, but poorly aimed. They're shaken. Who wouldn't be, facing these relentless gas-masked figures emerging from the fog without fear? 20 more meters. The young Krieger to my left lets out a harsh grunt as a slug catches him in the side. It punches through his greatcoat, likely lodging in his flak armor or flesh beneath. He stumbles but doesn't fall. I grab his arm to steady him for a moment. He nods, thanks, and continues forward, unfaltering. Emperor's teeth, these people. Suddenly, a brilliant flare of heat and light whooshes over our heads. One of our combat engineers behind has fired a plasma gun, and it turns an enemy heavy bolter emplacement into molten slag. I silently thank the machine god and press on. We reach the lip of the enemy trench. A Krieg guardsman to my right vaults in first, bayonet lowered like a spear. I hear the scream of a dying heretic as the blade finds flesh. I jump down into the trench right after the young soldier. It's chaos. Close quarters, slaughter. Last gunshots at point blank, the wet crunch of entrenching tools or rifle butts striking skulls, the guttural growls of men locked in melee. A traitor guardsman lunges at me with a rusty axe, eyes wild. I sidestep clumsily. I'm not as fast as I once was, and he clips my shoulder guard, knocking my cap off. Before he can recover, I rev my chainsword and swing upward. The teeth bite into his torso and chew through with a spray of blood. He drops, bisected diagonally from hip to opposite shoulder. I yank the spinning blade free with effort. Out of the corner of my eye, I see the young Krieger. He's grappling with an enemy officer who is wielding a power sword. For an instant, the two are face to face, literally mask to face. The traitor, a ragged fellow with terror in his eyes, is snarling something at the silent Krieger, maybe begging or cursing. The power sword comes up, aimed at my soldier's throat. I raise my bolt pistol, but I have no clean shot without risking hitting my own man. It doesn't matter. The Krieger reacts with ferocious speed, catching the officer's sword arm with one hand and driving his bayonet up under the man's ribcage with the other. I hear the crunch as the blade goes in and the traitor officer's eyes bulge. My man withdraws the bayonet and lets the corpse slump to the ground. I give him a short nod of approval, and he returns it before charging further down the trench, already seeking the next target. I retrieve my cap from the mud. My skull and wreath insignia now smeared, oh well, and jam it back on my head. Can't let the men see their commissar without his cap. That'd just look wrong, a petty thought amid the carnage, I know. A series of explosions rattles the ground. Grenades thrown by our flanking units to clear out the deeper dugouts. I briefly check the sky. Through the haze, I catch a glimpse of our signal flare, green smoke trailing upward. That means the other platoons have secured their portions of the line. We are winning this fight. The enemy is falling back or surrendering. A few throw down their weapons and raise their hands. Normally, I would order mercy if possible. They're beaten, after all. But this is Krieg. The soldiers show no interest in taking prisoners. I see a pair of my guardsmen efficiently gun down a pleading traitor who was on his knees. Is it cruelty or just expedience? Hard to say. I neither condone it nor rush to stop it. There will be no prisoners taken today. That much is certain. Commissar, sir! A shout cuts through the din. I turn to see one of our grenadiers pointing up at a bunker embedded in the trench wall just ahead. Its gun slit is pouring fire, a stubborn holdout with an autocannon. The position is shredding a cluster of our troops who can't advance until it's neutralized. I duck low and push forward, joining the grenadier behind a pile of rubble. "Charge or grenade?" he asks tersely. I pull a frag grenade from my belt, answer by action. Together we pop up just long enough to lob 2 grenades through the bunker's firing slit. A panicked yell from inside. Then boom, boom. Wood, metal, and body parts spray out of the opening. We clamber over the shattered bunker. Inside, what remains of the crew is slumped in gruesome piles. It's clear. I haul myself back onto the trench parapet, breathing heavily. My coat is spattered with Emperor knows what viscera, but I'm alive. The fighting here is effectively over. A sudden movement draws my eye to the right. The young Krieger, Emperor, bless him, still on his feet, has leapt out of the trench and is pursuing a few stragglers who broke and ran out into the open. He's actually faster than I can bellow, "Hold!" My voice is drowned in the chaos anyway. I watch as he bayonets one fleeing man in the back, drops him, then turns to the last one. A terrified lad who couldn't be more than 18, stumbling and falling in the mud. To my surprise, the traitor youth rolls over and pulls a las pistol from his belt with shaking hands. From my vantage, I see what's about to happen as if in slow motion. The young Krieger is practically on top of him, raising his rifle to finish the wretch, when the cornered traitor fires. It's a wild, desperate shot, but fate is cruelly ironic. The lasbolt catches my soldier square in the breastplate at point blank. I cringe internally. It's enough to punch through his armor. The Krieger staggers, and for a heartbeat I want to believe he'll shake it off. He doesn't. He drops to his knees, then collapses face first into the mud, not far from the man he'd just killed. A few nearby shots from other guardsmen finish off the last survivor, but my attention is on the fallen. "Emperor, no!" I hiss through clenched teeth. I jump out of the trench and rush over to the young guardsman's side. He's lying still, half submerged in a shell crater puddle. I heave him over onto his back. The front of his coat and cuirass are blackened and scorched where the lasbolt hit. I fumble, pulling off one of his heavy gauntlets to feel for a pulse at his neck. Nothing. He's gone. That quick. My jaw tightens as I look at his face. The mask is still on, intact. He died with it on. I almost reach to remove it to see the face of this nameless hero, but I stop myself. They wouldn't want that. Instead, I straighten his uniform as best I can and gently pry the las gun from his hands. Then I notice, clutched in his left hand amazingly, is a small flag. It's the platoon standard, a pennant bearing the Aquila. In his last moments, somehow he pulled it free and held it aloft, perhaps to mark that we took this ground. The banner is smeared with mud, but still identifiable. A lump forms in my throat. Even dying, he was thinking of the mission, of the symbol of the Emperor. With a deep breath, I take the flag and plant its pole firmly into the earth by the crater, holding it upright. The tattered Aquila flutters in the poisonous breeze, a sign to all that this position now belongs to the Imperium once more. A victory paid for in blood. Around me, the firefight is winding down. A few last shots ring out in the distance, but by and large, silence is creeping back, broken only by moans of the wounded and crackling embers from burnt-out emplacements. Our own soldiers are already moving among the fallen, distinguishing which bodies can yield usable equipment and which wounded might possibly be saved. The quartermasters will be here any minute to administer the Emperor's peace where needed. I remain kneeling at the side of the young Krieger's corpse for a moment longer. There is no time for sentiment, I know, but I permit myself a brief prayer. I place a gloved hand on his chest, over the ruined Aquila emblem of his uniform, and murmur, "Rest now, son of Krieg. The Emperor accepts your sacrifice." Words I've spoken dozens of times, yet they feel especially poignant now. A shadow looms over me. It's the watchmaster with the company banner, checking on why I'm kneeling. I rise to my feet, clearing my throat and blinking away the beginning of a tear. Must have been the acrid smoke irritating my eyes, of course. "Report, watchmaster," I say, voice steady. He snaps a sharp salute. "Strong point secure, sir. Enemy routed." I nod. I take one last look at the fallen soldier at my feet, then force myself to turn away. There's still work to be done. "Begin reorganization. Set perimeter defenses in case of counterattack," I order. He immediately moves to carry it out. Troopers are already scooping out and reversing sandbags, turning the captured trench into a defense facing the other way. Efficient, always efficient. I retrieve my bolt pistol from where it fell nearby and holster it. My chainsword is coated in gore. I wipe it on a rag and power it down. The adrenaline of battle is ebbing, and a heavy fatigue starts to fill the void. My shoulder where the axe hit throbs badly, but I'll live. Another scar to add to the collection. As I walk along the newly taken line, I pass groups of Krieg soldiers and give them encouraging nods or a clasp on the shoulder here and there. "Well done," I say quietly to one who looks particularly spent, blood oozing from a gash on his forehead. He doesn't respond verbally, just inclines his head, perhaps out of respect, perhaps acknowledging the achievement. Their version of jubilation is a sort of grim contentment, I suppose. Within minutes, the site is secure. We've accomplished our objective. I can already hear on the Vox the brigade command voicing surprised congratulations. They hadn't expected us to crack this nut so quickly. A colonel from an allied regiment chimes in with an almost incredulous praise. I mute the link for now. There will be formal debriefings later. I step aside from the bustle and allow myself a single moment, a heartbeat or two to just be. My hands are shaking slightly now that the fight is over, a delayed reaction. I clasp them behind my back to hide the tremor and take a long look at the scene. The rising sun is turning the toxic clouds a malignant shade of gold. The trench works ahead are ours, marked by the little imperial flag still waving where I left it. The bodies of friend and foe lie intermingled in grisly testament to the cost. And around me, the Death Korps of Krieg stand silent amidst the carnage, as if they were simply gardeners tending to a charnel field, which in a sense they are. So what more is there to say? This is what it is day after day. This is my life among the Death Korps. I am their commissar, charged to temper their fury with just a touch of caution to ensure their deaths have meaning. Most people back on their comfortable worlds will never know my name, nor the names of the thousands of Krieg soldiers who fall in anonymous service. We're just numbers in a long report, fighting in sectors most maps don't even bother to name. And that's fine. We do not fight for glory or recognition. We fight because duty demands it. If you were to see us now, a line of ragged, smoke-stained figures in gas masks and greatcoats standing wordlessly amid victory's wreckage, you might feel pity or horror or perhaps admiration. If you've any sense, you'd definitely feel gratitude, because it's men like these and officers like me who form the bloody shield of the Imperium. Whenever a world is too horrific or a foe too fearsome for ordinary soldiers, the call goes out, "Send in the Death Korps," and we go. "Emperor, help us," we go into the worst of it, and we do not stop until the job's done. This is the life of a Krieg Commissar, a life spent dancing on the razor's edge between duty and destruction. It's not the grand heroic saga some might imagine. There are no parades for us, no trumpets, no songs. It's a life of endless mud and blood, of calculating how much death to deal and how much to endure. It's issuing the order to attack when others would flee, and sometimes ordering the halt when others would foolishly charge. It's watching countless brave men breathe their last and telling yourself it was worth it, that it had to be worth it. It's writing reports by lamplight on how many died today and how many replacements we'll need tomorrow. It's a dry chuckle at a macabre joke to keep from weeping at the senselessness of it all. It's duty, obsessive, unrelenting duty, bound by oath and honor and the fear of something far worse than death, the fear of failure. And yet, I endure. I shoulder this burden because someone must. The Emperor, in his infinite wisdom, stationed me here not just to keep the Krieg in line, but perhaps to remind others that even among an army of the zealous dead, humanity, fragile, stubborn humanity, still plays a role. Maybe I'm here to be a tether to sanity for those outside, or a relic of compassion for those within. Or maybe I'm simply here because I proved I could handle it, and now this is my lot. In any case, I will see it through. And so I continue, duty-bound and destiny-driven, one battle to the next. There is always another war, another siege, another hopeless defense or desperate assault. As long as I draw breath, I will stride forward in my black coat and peaked cap, bolt pistol in one hand and chainsword in the other, a solitary figure trying to direct an avalanche of sacrifice. I will cheer them on when it's right and hold them back when it's not, and spend every drop of courage I have to make sure that when these men die, as they inevitably will, they do so for the maximum gain. I owe them that at least. They give everything. The least I can do is see that it counts. I know my fate is likely sealed. I won't die peacefully in bed. One day, perhaps sooner rather than later, a lost round or piece of shrapnel with my name on it will find me. Or maybe some over-eager Krieger will mistake one of my tactical withdrawals for cowardice, and I'll get a bolt round to the skull from behind. Emperor forbid. Either way, I fully expect to die in the field, in the mud, with my boots on and my heart full of battle. And you know what? There are worse ways to go. If that moment comes and I still manage to plant our flag on the objective, or inspire the last man to fight on, or save a few extra lives by my action, then I'll consider it a death well spent. Only in death does duty end. For them, for me, for us all. But until that fateful day, I remain at my post, the Commissar of Krieg, the lone shepherd of the dead, steadying their charge, tempering their fury, and quietly, steadfastly guiding them toward the Emperor's victory.